The hardest part of the HBS application isn't the writing. It's actually deciding which stories to tell where. Because across the application, HBS is really evaluating 3 different things. First, they want to understand that you are business-minded. That's why they ask you about your career goals and how you've made key decisions along the way. This is where many applicants fall into the trap of simply rehashing their resume. But the admissions committee already has your resume. What they're really trying to understand are the pivotal moments, the experiences or decisions that have shaped your path, and explain where you want to go next. Second, they want to see leadership. So, not surprisingly, one of the essays asks you to describe a leadership experience. The key here is not just describing what happened, but showing how you influenced others, navigated challenges, and what kind of leader you actually are. Third, they're looking for growth and curiosity. That's why they ask about a time when you learned something new or pushed yourself beyond your comfort zone. They want to see people who take initiative and continue to evolve. And the tricky part, if you think about it, is that you might have stories that could fit multiple prompts. So part of the work when you're applying to HBS is deciding which story goes where, so that together your essays show the full picture of who you are. One last thing that surprises people about the HBS application: the online application itself is actually quite short. You can only list a small number of jobs, awards, and activities. For applicants with long resumes, that can feel frustrating, but everyone is working within the same constraints. So the goal is to simply choose the experiences that are most meaningful to you and the ones that are most representative of you. Remember, HBS's application isn't necessarily long, but it does require thoughtful storytelling and strategic choices about what you include and what to leave out. Everyone says the Stanford GSB application is the hardest one out there. And honestly, they're not wrong. There are really 3 reasons why. First, the sheer quantity of writing. You will write more in the Stanford application than you will in any other MBA application. The 2 core essays alone give you up to 1,000 words. Then there are 3 short impact essays and another short question in the application itself. By the time you're done, you've written roughly 1,500 words. Stanford also has one of the most detailed online applications. So the number of stories, examples, and narratives you need to refine, it's simply higher. Second, the level of introspection. Stanford asks the very famous question, what matters most to you and why? And the truth is, most of us, I sure haven't, have never really answered that question before. To do so requires vulnerability, it requires authenticity, and it requires writing in a way that is very different from how we usually communicate in our professional lives. And here's something that most people don't realize. The GSB Admissions Committee, they read your What Matters Most essay last. If it's a rehash of what they already know, of your resume, or things that they've already seen in your other answers, you're not digging deeply enough. Our clients regularly spend months on this essay, exploring, reflecting, not to perfect their answer, but to really dig deep enough and to give the school a sense of who they are. Third, the focus on impact. Stanford's philosophy is about leaders who change lives, change organizations, and change the world. That's why they ask for multiple examples of times when you have done just that, when you've created meaningful impact. Technically, these essay questions are labeled optional. But in practice, they're not optional. They're an important opportunity to show how you make a difference in the environments around you. Look, the good news is this. The amount of reflection Stanford requires can actually be valuable because by the time you finish the application, you will likely have a much clearer understanding of who you are and what truly matters to you, regardless of the outcome.
One of the biggest mistakes that applicants make with Wharton's essays is underestimating how hard it can be to write a short essay. Wharton's essays are much shorter than many other business school applications. For example, they ask for your immediate post-MBA goal in just 50 words. Then they give you 150 words to explain your career goals for the first 3 to 5 years after business school and to connect those goals to your long-term career ambitions. That's not a lot of space. So the challenge with Wharton is clarity. You really have to think through your goals before you start writing. That doesn't mean that you need your entire career to be perfectly mapped out, but you do need to show that you've thought seriously about the kind of impact that you want to have and the problems that you want to solve. And even though these essays are focused on the future, you do have to ground your goals in your past experiences. Wharton's admission committee needs to see that your ambitions actually make sense given what you've done so far. Otherwise, it can feel like wishful thinking. The other tricky essay asks how you plan to contribute to the Wharton community. Applicants often make one of two mistakes here. They either focus entirely on themselves, what they want to gain from Wharton, or they focus entirely on Wharton, listing clubs or resources without explaining their role in them. The strongest answers do both. They show that you've researched Wharton and understand what makes Wharton distinctive, but you also explain how you will actively participate, how you will contribute, how you will build, and how you will help move forward on campus. So yes, Wharton's essays are short, but that brevity means every word has to work harder for you.
MIT Sloan's MBA application looks deceptively simple, but that's actually what makes it one of the trickiest applications out there. Here are the 3 parts that tend to trip people up the most. First, the cover letter. Unlike most schools, Sloan asks for a traditional cover letter instead of a typical MBA essay. It's also only 300 words, which makes it even harder. But before you panic, I advise applicants to consider Sloan's mission about developing leaders who solve important problems. Use that mission as your North Star. Share ideally 2 strong examples that demonstrate the qualities Sloan cares about: curiosity, initiative, the ability to work through challenges, and of course, driving meaningful results. And don't waste time explaining your goals or why Sloan. They're not asking for it. Second, the organizational chart. This one catches people off guard, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Sloan simply wants to understand where you sit in your organization and how your company is structured. The key is clarity. I've seen some really convoluted first drafts of these org charts. And if I can't get it, there's a good chance that the admissions committee won't get it either. Someone who has never heard of your company should be able to look at your chart and quickly understand how the organization works and where you fit within it. Don't overthink it, but do make it easy to follow. The third tricky part, the videos. Sloan includes 2 video components. The first is actually a fun one. You're introducing yourself to your future classmates. So just think about it that way. What would you share that would make someone excited to meet you in the classroom? No fronting, no bragging, because who likes that? Instead, imagine you are, just like the prompt says, introducing yourself to your classmates, your teammates, your friends. The second video is more of an on-the-spot question. They can ask almost anything. In fact, one recent example was, if you were a punctuation mark, which one would you be and why? I love this one. I personally would be an exclamation point. The client who was asked this question said he'd be a question mark because he's always asking questions in meetings. But here's the thing, you can't really prep for the exact question. The best preparation is simply getting comfortable speaking naturally, thinking on your feet, and spending a moment looking at your resume and your application to get in the mindset of being you. The final thing to remember about Sloan's application is this: it's intentionally short. There are fewer essays and fewer questions on the online application than most schools. This means that your resume, your recommendation, and these few components carry a lot of weight. Sloan is asking exactly what they want to know. So focus on answering their questions clearly and showcasing the best of who you are.
The biggest mistake applicants make with Chicago Booth's application is overthinking it. 2 parts of the application in particular tend to trip people up. First is the photo prompt. Booth shows you 4 images, each representing a different Booth value, and it asks you to choose one photo and explain how that photograph connects to one of your own values. This is where applicants start needlessly stressing out. Clients often ask us, which one is the best one to choose? Is it better to pick the one of the crowd of students cheering or the one of the classroom? They think that one image somehow gives them an advantage over another. There isn't. What they do care about is the story that you choose to tell. So don't spend your essay describing the picture, which they already know what it includes, or philosophizing about the value, which Booth has already chosen. Instead, show the value in action. Tell a story where you have demonstrated that value, what you did, and how and why it mattered. We often advise clients to use the STAR format: situation, task, action, result, reflection. The second tricky part of Booth's application questions is the word limit, or more accurately, the lack of a word limit. Most business schools give you a strict maximum word count. Booth does the opposite. They give you a minimum, 250 words. That means it's up to you to decide how long your essay should be and what you should include. And this is where judgment matters. The MBA application process is often a test of strategic communication. If you go too long, you're asking the reader to spend more time on your story than is necessary. So, be vivid, be specific, but crucially, be concise. Many strong booth essays land somewhere around the 400 to 500 word range, long enough to tell a very clear story, but short enough to respect the reader's time and keep them interested. Booth's application isn't a trick. It does reward applicants who communicate clearly and thoughtfully. The trickiest part of Kellogg's application is that applicants often make it harder than it needs to be. There are really three key parts of the application that tend to trip people up. First, the essay prompts. Kellogg begins its essay questions with a bit of framing language around Kellogg leaders and the community. Applicants sometimes get distracted or tripped up by that and start overthinking how to respond. I suspect it's just Kellogg trying to infuse some subliminal messaging about the strengths and character of the program. If you look closely, the core questions are actually pretty straightforward. For example, the Why Kellogg essay ultimately comes down to explaining your career goals and why Kellogg is the right place for you to pursue them. So read the full prompt, understand the spirit of it, and then focus on answering the actual question clearly. Second, the video questions. These tend to make applicants nervous, but they shouldn't. Kellogg uses videos because they want to get to know you as a person. The questions might be about why Kellogg, or they might be behavioral, like give me an example of a time you worked on a team or handled a challenge. The best preparation isn't memorizing a script. It's simply knowing your story well, your goals, your experiences, and the moments that have shaped you. And remember, this is not a public speaking competition. Kellogg is not looking for perfection, far from it. I've had clients get cut off mid-sentence, convinced they're out of the running or panicked because they couldn't come up with a good response, only to later be admitted. Kellogg is simply trying to get a sense of who you are. The third tricky part is the decision essay. Kellogg asks you to describe a time you had to make a difficult decision and then explain the values that guided you. Applicants often worry that their decision isn't big enough. But the size of the decision isn't the point. What matters is showing how you thought through the situation, the values that guided you, and what you learned from the experience. Remember, Kellogg's application is not trying to trick you. It does reward applicants who stay focused, who communicate clearly, and who resist the urge to overthink. One of the most deceptively difficult questions in MBA admissions comes from Columbia Business School. Describe your long-term dream job. The question sounds simple, but it's where many applicants get tripped up. The application can look fairly straightforward at first glance. But there are three places where applicants often stumble. First, that goals essay. Columbia gives you about 500 words and asks you to describe your career goals, including your long-term dream job. Applicants often make one of two mistakes. Some people aren't bold enough. Their dream job sounds vague or overly cautious. Others go too far in the opposite direction and describe something completely disconnected from business school. The key is to think about the problems that you want to solve and the impact that you want to have. Then connect the dots clearly. Your past experience, why you need business school, your short-term goals, and how that leads to your long-term career vision. Everything should flow logically. The second place that people get tripped up is the Why Columbia essay. The prompt asks what opportunities you will co-create at Columbia. That language can feel a little abstract, but the underlying question is simple. Have you done your research about Columbia? What resources, clubs, and opportunities excite you? And just as importantly, how will you contribute? So you don't want to just say you'll bring your own perspective. You want to think about what you'll build and what you'll participate in and how you'll make the community stronger. So the goal is really to think about how Columbia will help you and also how you will help Columbia and your community. Third, the community essay. Columbia asks about a time when you made a community more welcoming, inclusive, or collaborative. Applicants sometimes assume that the example needs to be huge, but it doesn't. Even small moments can work really well if you clearly explain what you did, why it mattered, what you learned, and the impact. A simple STAR structure, which is situation, task, action, result, and reflection, works very well here. The bottom line, Columbia's application may look simple, but it rewards applicants who clearly connect their goals, their motivations, and the impact they want to have in the larger world.